That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
You're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind.
In 2004, the movie called The Passion of the Christ shook the world. Directed by Mel Gibson, the movie was an emotional and spiritual roller coaster that left audiences speechless. But behind the powerful performances and gripping scenes is a story that is just as intense. Mel Gibson, the mastermind behind the project, had a chilling warning for Jim Caviezel, the actor chosen to portray Jesus Christ. What led Mel Gibson to issue this dire warning, and what sacrifices did Jim Caviezel make to bring this iconic role to life? Stay tuned to find out how this one film changed lives forever. How Mel Gibson's Hollywood journey led him to making in The Passion of Christ. Mel Gibson's journey to creating The Passion of the Christ started long before he even thought about directing a movie. Born on January 3, 1956, in Peekskill, New York, Mel was the sixth of 11 children in a big Catholic family. When he was 12, his father, Hutton Gibson, moved the family to Australia in 1968. This move wasn't just about a change of scenery. It was because Hutton wanted to protect his family from the cultural changes happening in America at the time. Little did Mel know, this decision would lead to him eventually creating one of the most talked about films in history. In Australia, Mel didn't start off as someone who dreamed of being a movie star. In fact, he wanted to be a journalist, but his sister saw something in him and sent in an application for him to attend the National Institute of Dramatic Art, also known as NIDA, in Sydney. Mel got in, and soon he was learning about theater, acting, and storytelling. By the time he graduated in the late 1970s, Mel had already started appearing in small plays and television shows, slowly building his confidence. Mel's big break came in 1979 when he starred in Mad Max, a low-budget Australian film that unexpectedly became a worldwide hit. The story of a man surviving in a dangerous post-apocalyptic world resonated with audiences, and Mel's intense performance caught everyone's attention. With the success of Mad Max, Mel was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. 2 years later, he reprised his role in Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which made him an international star. But fame wasn't always easy for Mel. Hollywood, with all its glitz and glamour, was a world very different from the simpler life he had grown up with. Mel described it as exciting but also lonely, and filled with people who only cared about money. Even as he worked on successful films, he felt out of place. He felt like Hollywood was focused on making blockbusters, not on telling meaningful stories. By the early 1990s, Mel wanted more control over the stories he was a part of. That's when he decided to try his hand at directing. In 1993, he directed his first movie, The Man Without a Face. The film was about a man who had been shunned by society and was searching for redemption. It wasn't a huge hit, but it showed that Mel had a talent for working behind the camera. Then, in 1995, Mel directed Braveheart. The movie, which he also starred in, told the story of William Wallace.
Sons of Scotland! I am William Wallace.
William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard.
A Scottish warrior fighting for freedom. Braveheart was a massive success, winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The film proved that Mel wasn't just a great actor. He was also a visionary filmmaker. But even with all the praise, Mel felt like something was missing. Around this time, Mel began to reflect more deeply on his faith. Growing up in a religious family, he had always believed in God, but his time in Hollywood had made him feel distant from his spiritual roots. He started to think about how he could use his talents to tell a story that would inspire people and bring them closer to their faith. The idea for The Passion of the Christ came to him in the late 1990s. Mel had been reading the Bible and reflecting on the sacrifices Jesus made. He realized that most movies about Jesus only scratched the surface of what really happened during the crucifixion. He wanted to make a film that showed the raw, painful truth of Jesus' final hours, a film that would help people understand the depth of his sacrifice. But when Mel started pitching his idea to Hollywood studios, he faced a lot of rejection. Many studio executives didn't think a movie about Jesus, especially one told in ancient languages like Aramaic and Latin, would make money. Some even thought the idea was too controversial. Mel was undeterred. He believed in his vision so strongly that he decided to fund the film himself, putting $30 million of his own money into the project. This was a huge risk. If the movie failed, Mel could lose everything he had worked for. But for him, it wasn't about the money. It was about creating something meaningful. He assembled a dedicated cast and crew and began filming in Italy in 2002. The process was grueling, with long hours and intense scenes that pushed everyone involved to their limits. When The Passion of the Christ was finally released on February 25, 2004, it became one of the most talked about movies of the year. Looking back, Mel's journey to making The Passion of the Christ was anything but easy. It was shaped by his early years in Australia, his rise to fame in Hollywood, and his desire to tell stories that mattered. Now, while the movie made him a lot of money, Mel faced a lot of public backlash, specifically related to the actor that played the role of Jesus, Jim Caviezel. But before all this happened, Mel actually warned Jim about the issues he might face if he played this role. Keep watching to find out what happened next. Mel's revelation about Jesus' role in the movie and the backlash he received. When Mel Gibson began working on The Passion of the Christ, he knew the story he wanted to tell was unlike anything Hollywood had ever done before. For him, the role of Jesus wasn't just another character in a movie. It was a deeply spiritual responsibility, one that carried immense weight. Mel believed that portraying Jesus required not only exceptional acting, but also a deep personal connection to the faith and message behind the character. Mel found Jim Caviezel, an actor who shared his Christian faith and was willing to take on the role. But from the very beginning, Mel was honest with Jim about what this decision could mean for him. Mel warned Jim that taking this role could end his career.
He called me, he says, if you do this movie, you may never work in this town again. I don't want to be responsible for that.
Hollywood was a place that often shied away from religious topics, especially ones as controversial as The Passion of the Christ. The film's subject matter, combined with its unflinching portrayal of Jesus' suffering, was bound to bring up debates and criticism. Despite the warning, Jim didn't hesitate. For him, playing Jesus wasn't just an acting job, it was a calling. He felt a deep connection to the role and believed it was his purpose to bring the story of Jesus to life. Jim knew the risks, but his faith gave him the courage to move forward. He once said, "This role is not about my career, it's about truth and faith."
I'd never been a guy who would sell his soul to get, money or fame. Was never my goal. It was to serve my faith, my God.
On set, Jim's performance as Jesus was extraordinary. He approached the role with humility and dedication, spending countless hours studying scripture and praying. He wanted to understand not just the physical pain Jesus endured, but also the emotional and spiritual burden of carrying humanity's sins. Every expression, every word, and every movement Jim brought to the screen was infused with this understanding, but the journey wasn't easy. Filming The Passion of the Christ was one of the most challenging experiences Jim had ever faced. The crucifixion scenes, in particular, were both physically and emotionally grueling. During one take, Jim was struck by lightning.
I could feel the suctioning occur. And then it was probably more like 3 seconds. It felt like 5, but it was probably less than that. And then boom.
In another, he dislocated his shoulder while carrying the heavy cross. The freezing weather and long hours only added to the difficulty. But through it all, Jim remained committed, seeing the pain as a way to connect more deeply with the suffering of Jesus.
There were so many days that we were shooting the Golgotha scene where he's up on the cross. This is when he's being crucified. And there would be winds of 40 miles an hour.
Jim also described moments on set that felt surreal, even otherworldly. During the crucifixion scenes, he said time seemed to slow down, and he felt an overwhelming sense of peace despite the pain. He later shared that he experienced what he believed was an out-of-body moment, as if his spirit was watching everything unfold from above. The atmosphere on set was often described as sacred, with cast and crew members moved to tears during filming.
On the cross, I had to stay in a position for 8-9 minutes while they had all the 3 cameras rolling. And I literally put all my weight into one leg and keep it in a squat position while the left leg hung over it.
Despite the powerful impact of the film and the dedication Jim brought to the role, the backlash was immediate. When The Passion of the Christ was released in 2004, it became one of the most talked about movies of the year. But the controversy surrounding the film overshadowed much of its success, particularly for Jim. Critics accused the film of being too violent, while others claimed it promoted anti-Semitism. The intense reactions from audiences and media created a polarizing environment. While many praised the film for its honesty and spiritual depth, others dismissed it as divisive and offensive. In the middle of all this was Jim, whose career suddenly came to a halt. Hollywood, which had once embraced him, now turned its back. Offers for leading roles disappeared, and Jim found himself sidelined in an industry that no longer wanted to work with him. Mel's warning had come true, but instead of feeling bitter, Jim chose to focus on his faith. He saw the sacrifices he made as meaningful, and said he would do it all over again if given the chance. Mel also faced a lot of criticism. As the director, he became a lightning rod for debates about the film's message and its impact. But like Jim, Mel believed the story was worth telling, no matter the cost. Were these two men right in their convictions that the movie would have a great legacy? Stick around to find out. The enduring legacy of The Passion of the Christ. After The Passion of Christ's release in 2004, people who watched it described the film as amazing and unforgettable, with its raw and emotional storytelling touching millions. The film's unflinching depiction of the last hours of Jesus Christ's life brought on conversations about faith, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Its message reached beyond religion, inviting people to reflect on love, redemption, and the power of belief. For Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, the impact of the film was deeply personal. Taking on the role came with great challenges, both during and after filming. Hollywood largely distanced itself from Jim after the movie, but he remained strong in his faith. For Jim, playing Jesus wasn't just about acting. It was a mission to bring the story of Christ to life in a way that felt real and powerful. He said the role strengthened his connection to God and gave him a sense of purpose. Despite the professional struggles he faced, Jim embraced the film's success as a chance to share the gospel with others. He traveled around the world, speaking about his experiences and encouraging people to live with faith and love. Jim's story became an example of standing firm in your beliefs, even when it comes with a cost. He often said that the sacrifices he made were worth it because the message of the film touched so many lives. The movie itself left a lasting legacy. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, earning over $600 million worldwide. But more importantly, it created a space for faith-based films in Hollywood. Before The Passion of the Christ, religious movies rarely made it to the big screen, especially on such a large scale. Mel Gibson's decision to take a risk and make the film showed that there was an audience hungry for stories about faith and spirituality. The Passion of the Christ also inspired countless people to reconnect with their faith. Churches used the film as a teaching tool, and people from all walks of life shared how it moved them to think more deeply about their own spiritual journeys. Even years later, the movie continues to be a source of inspiration and reflection for viewers around the world. Through all the backlash and sacrifices, both Mel and Jim found strength in their faith. They believed that the story they brought to the screen had the power to inspire and change lives, and for the millions of people who watched The Passion of the Christ, it did just that. Celine's health struggles and journey to Rome. Celine Dion has always had a unique take on religion. To her, faith isn't tied to the walls of a church or the rituals people follow. She believes in seeing God in everyday life. She often said that having faith in yourself is just like having faith in God. This belief kept her grounded for years, but everything changed when her health took a serious hit. Her world turned upside down when she was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, a rare neurological condition that causes muscle stiffness and spasms.
Recently, have been diagnosed with a very rare neurological disorder called stiff person syndrome.
Suddenly, she was stuck between holding on to her faith and accepting her new reality. So what decision did she make? There is more to reveal. Stay tuned for more details. At first, the signs were subtle. Her foot would spasm unexpectedly, and she dismissed it as nothing major. But the spasms kept coming back, getting stronger each time. Soon, performing became nearly impossible.
And now you can show me, yeah. And that's what happens, and it's very difficult for me to hear that and to show this to you.
And she had to cancel her shows. For someone like Celine, who lived for her connection with her fans, this was devastating. 2 years ago, she revealed her diagnosis to the public, explaining that it was the reason she was stepping away from the stage. Fans were heartbroken, but they rallied behind her, sending messages of love and support. During this time, Celine threw herself into treatment. She began physical therapy, vocal exercises, and even athletic training 5 days a week. Doctors were hopeful, but the process was slow and exhausting. Her voice, which had once been her greatest gift, became her biggest challenge. Singing felt like climbing a mountain, each note harder to reach than the last. But despite everything, Celine stayed optimistic. Fast forward to this year, and Celine surprised everyone with a major comeback. She sang at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, marking her first public performance in years. Before that, she released a documentary called I Am Celine Dion on Prime Video, giving fans a behind-the-scenes look at her journey. The film showed her struggles, her resilience, and her determination to sing again. But there's another side to her story, one that didn't make it into the documentary. Not long after her performance at the Olympics, Celine visited a small church in Rome, seeking solace. It was a sunny afternoon, and the air felt crisp and fresh. She had been in the city for a medical consultation with a renowned surgeon who specializes in rare neurological conditions. The surgeon, Dr. Lorenzo Moretti, had been working with her for months, and they were discussing a new experimental treatment. The procedure involved deep brain stimulation, where electrodes are implanted in specific areas of the brain to help control muscle spasms. It was a risky surgery, but the results from other patients had been promising. Dr. Moretti explained the process in detail, showing Celine scans of her brain and outlining the steps they would take. She listened carefully, nodding as he spoke, but the weight of it all was overwhelming. After the consultation, Celine felt the need to clear her head. She asked her driver to take her to a nearby church, a quiet place where she could sit and think. The church was a beautiful old building with high ceilings, stained glass windows, and an air of peace. She walked inside, wearing a simple white dress and a beige scarf. Her face looked tired, but there was a softness in her expression as she took in the space around her. The church was almost empty, save for a few people sitting in the pews. Celine found a spot near the back, where the sunlight streaming through the windows painted the floor in vibrant colors. She folded her hands, closed her eyes, and began to pray. Her thoughts were scattered, jumping between her fear of the surgery, her desire to sing again, and her struggle to accept her condition. As she prayed, she didn't notice a figure approaching her. It was Pope Francis. He had been in the church for a private moment of reflection and had noticed her sitting alone. Dressed in his simple white robe, he walked up to her quietly, his face kind and gentle. When she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, she was surprised, but immediately felt a sense of calm. The Pope smiled and gestured for her to join him at the altar. Celine hesitated for a moment, but then stood up and followed him. Together, they lit a candle, its flame flickering gently in the dim light. She whispered another prayer, her voice trembling slightly. The Pope placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, Celine felt a small glimmer of hope. The Pope led her to a side room, a quiet space filled with books and a small desk. They sat down, and he listened as she began to share her story. Her voice wavered as she talked about her diagnosis, her canceled shows, and the emotional toll it had taken on her. She pulled out a small journal from her bag, its pages filled with scribbled notes and personal reflections. She flipped through the journal, showing him entries about her therapy sessions and the moments when she felt like giving up. One page had a sketch of a microphone with the words, "Will I ever sing again?" written next to it. Another page had a list of songs she dreamed of performing once her voice recovered. As she spoke, her hands trembled, and tears began to fill her eyes. She tried to hold them back, but the emotions were too strong. The Pope handed her a tissue, his expression understanding and patient. Celine wiped her tears and continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. She told him about her fear of the upcoming surgery.
And reported on it when the singer Celine Dion announced she had a rare neurological disease, causing her to cancel some concerts.
How she worried it might not work, or worse, that it could take away the little strength she had left. The Pope nodded, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm of her thoughts. He didn't interrupt, letting her pour out everything she had been holding inside. At one point, Celine showed him a photo on her phone. It was from the night of her last performance before her diagnosis. She looked radiant in the picture, her smile wide and her eyes sparkling. But she told him that even then, she had been in pain, her body struggling to keep up with the demands of the show. The Pope listened intently, his hands folded on the table. His calm demeanor made it easier for her to open up. She talked about her family, her fans, and the immense pressure she felt to stay strong for everyone around her. But most of all, she spoke about her love for music and how much she missed it.
It's such a pleasure to be able to say, I want to talk. There, you're going to hear my voice.
As the conversation went on, the Pope offered her words of encouragement, reminding her of the strength she had shown in facing her challenges. His voice was gentle but firm, and his words carried a weight that kicked her to cry more. At this point, the Pope wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing by trying to console her. But what happens next will shock you. Celine finds peace with Pope Francis. As the Pope observed Celine's quiet tears, he sensed she needed more than just kind words. He gestured for her to follow him deeper into the church. They walked past the rows of pews and through a small carved wooden door. Beyond it was a private garden hidden from the bustling world outside. The garden was peaceful, with neatly trimmed hedges and a fountain in the center. Water trickled softly, creating a calming rhythm that filled the silence. Celine hesitated at first, but the Pope encouraged her with a small nod. She stepped onto the cobblestone path, feeling the warmth of the sun breaking through the trees above. The fresh air, mixed with the faint smell of flowers, brought a strange sense of relief to her chest. She walked toward the fountain, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The Pope guided her to a stone bench near the water. As she sat, she let her hands trail across the cool surface of the bench. The Pope stood nearby, his hands clasped together in thought. Without speaking, he motioned to the fountain. Celine turned her attention to the water. Its gentle ripples caught the sunlight, reflecting tiny bursts of light. The Pope spoke softly, pointing out how water could carve through stone over time, no matter how hard the stone was. The words struck a chord in Celine. She sat quietly, watching the ripples, her mind beginning to calm. She closed her eyes and focused on the sound of the water. The Pope stepped aside, allowing her a moment of solitude. After a while, he returned holding a small jar of holy water. He dipped his fingers into it and placed a drop on Celine's forehead. She felt the cool touch, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to take a deep breath. The Pope said nothing more, but his actions felt meaningful, even without words. As they left the garden, he led her to a side chapel rarely opened to visitors. Inside was a painting of Mary holding the infant Jesus. The room was lit with soft candles, their warm glow creating a serene atmosphere. Celine stared at the painting, her eyes lingering on Mary's gentle expression. She felt an odd comfort, as if the image was speaking to her heart. The Pope handed her a small wooden rosary, its beads polished smooth from years of use. Celine held it tightly, her fingers tracing the shape of each bead. It felt grounding, like a connection to something larger than her struggles. He encouraged her to stay in the chapel as long as she needed. She sat on the wooden bench, her head bowed, and let the stillness of the space wash over her. She thought about her journey, the endless doctor visits, the physical therapy, and the surgeries. She remembered how hopeless she had felt after her diagnosis, wondering if she would ever sing again. Her mind shifted to the difficult moments, times when her muscles froze mid-performance, leaving her unable to move. She thought about the hours spent in rehabilitation, pushing her body to regain strength. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, yet she had kept going. Sitting in the chapel now, she felt something shift inside her. The Pope returned after a while, carrying a small box. Inside was a vial of oil used for anointing the sick. He gently anointed her hands, which had been trembling moments ago. The warmth of the oil seemed to seep into her skin, and she felt her hands relax slightly. He then took out a thick, leather-bound book filled with handwritten prayers collected from people all over the world. He flipped through its pages, showing her messages from strangers who had prayed for her recovery. Celine was surprised by how many people had written about her, some sharing how her music had touched their lives. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from sadness. This nearly unbelievable miracle was witnessed by thousands of people, and it became known as the miracle of the sun.
Everybody was saying that if the miracle did not happen, the whole family would die. And so he stayed home. He was afraid. And because he was afraid to die, he wasn't there when the miracle of the sun occurred.
These experiences led to the acceptance of the first, second, and third secrets of Fatima that the lady shared with the children. So, what were these secrets? You're about to find out. Unveiling the secrets of Fatima. While 3 children received the secrets from the lady, only one of them was able to share what the lady said to them. Shortly after the apparition experience, something devastating happened in Fatima, leaving only Sister Lucia to recount the secrets that the lady had shared with her and her cousins. Francisco and Jacinta had died 1 year apart from each other due to the outbreak of the flu in Fatima. Although severely ill, Francisco spent most of his years after the vision offering his life as a penance to console the Lord, despite his health. Jacinta also suffered a similar fate as she spent her time praying and offering her sufferings for praying for peace in the world, the unsaved, and the Holy Father. When they died, in 1919 and 1920 respectively, Francisco was initially buried in the parish cemetery, and Jacinta was buried in her family tomb and later interred at the parish cemetery. By 1930, the Catholic Church declared that the miracle of the sun was worthy of belief. Later, in 1952, a tomb was prepared in the basilica at Cova da Iria, where they were buried to the right and left of the main altar respectively. They became beatified in 1979, and they were declared venerable by Pope John Paul II on the 13th of May, 1989. Lucia, on the other hand, survived the flu, and by 1921, she joined the College of Villar and was sent to Tuy. She made her confession as a nun on October 3, 1934. 7 years later, she wrote in her memoir, The Secret of the Fatima, that she received alongside her late cousins over 2 decades earlier. Now, let's look at the first secret. The first secret was a sea of fire that the lady showed them. It seemed to be beneath the earth, and she saw souls and demons in the fire. They were floating in the blazing fire like transparent burning embers. The flames of the fire made them rise into the air and fall back without weight, yet amidst shrieks and groans of pain. The souls had a human form, but the demons looked terrifying like unknown animals and were black yet transparent. She described the sight as terrifying. After this vision lasted, the lady made them know that there was something that could be done to save many souls from going to hell, for wars to end, and for peace to reign. She told them that this would happen if people stopped offending God, but if not, something worse would happen. Truly, the fulfillment of her requests marked the end of the First World War, which was currently raging at the time. The lady shared the second secret with the children, telling them to devote themselves to her immaculate heart. It made the children so happy knowing that her heart would be their refuge and lead them to God. They would often sing happily while picking wildflowers, calling on Sweet Mary to be their salvation, convert sinners, and save their souls from hell.
Do you wish to offer yourself to God, to endure all the suffering He may please to send you, to help atone for the sins by which He is offended, and to ask for the conversion of sinners?
She made them understand that God intended to establish the world's devotion to her Immaculate Heart. She promised to be with them always and comfort them and lead them to God through her heart. She guaranteed them that her Immaculate Heart would triumph in the end, ensuring that they were facing the route to heaven. She shared with the seers that a worse war would break out during the pontificate of Pius V. She also gave them a sign to prove it. They would see an unknown light illuminating a night as a sign that God was about to punish the world with wars, famine, and persecution for all of its crimes. The only way to prevent this from happening was to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart and offer the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. Upon heeding her request, peace would be restored and Russia would be converted. Without this, the world could expect wars, persecutions of the Church, and martyrdoms. If the Holy Father consecrated Russia to him, the world would enjoy a period of peace, she said. What do you think about this movie and what Mel Gibson went through while making it? Leave your opinions in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.